Is going on, guys? It's Yoji. In this video I want to simply talk to you about Harvest. It will be one of those Yoji rambling videos where I simply go on talking about a subject with gameplay in the background. So grab a cup of hot chocolate and let's talk Harvest. But forget about the garden, forget about collecting and harvesting seeds and the not very exciting boss fight at the end, that is the heart of the grove, but the crafting options? That stuff, in my opinion, needs to stay, as it is way more engaging and interesting, as well as more accessible and less punishing than PoE's default crafting method. The power level surely can be iterated on, but in my opinion it needs to stay as a viable alternative for endgame crafting. And here's why. Harvest crafting for the first time ever makes crafting worth partaking in, not only for the rich players, who can afford to throw away a few exalted orbs for the chance of getting something good, and instead makes crafting viable for everyone. Before, with essences or fossils or simply alteration and chaos crafting, it was very possible to make some decent usable gear, but other than getting extremely lucky or risking to destroy a potentially great item via annulment orbs or exalting a bad mod, and that stuff is a risk that is not worth taking for almost all of PoE's players. There was no cheap or risk-free way to further upgrade and improve an already decent item, aside from very limited bench crafting, but nothing that actually makes good endgame gear. And while the power level of Harvest crafting is definitely a point one could argue is too strong, I believe the crafting in Harvest has more to offer than just power level, and definitely more than the old PoE crafting system. First of all, Harvest crafting is a lot more knowledge based instead of pure gambling. While alteration and regal crafting, for example, you need to know which mods are worth augmenting and regaling, it is still overall mostly luck based. In Harvest, when you see an item and you have the knowledge about underlying modifier types, as well as have knowledge about the possible rolls that this base can roll, which is especially true for influenced bases, you can actually outline a roadmap of how to get to an item you want to craft step by step with Harvest crafting. This deterministic approach of farming up the augment and remove crafts needed to finish your item is much more exciting and motivating, to me at least, than saying to myself, hey, let's get another 500 alterations and hope for the best, lol. That's just pure gambling and to me, personally, very boring. With deterministic crafting you get to lay out a crafting plan, there's still some RNG involved, but overall the chances of getting what you need are way higher, and you can't destroy the item in the process unless you maybe misclick the wrong craft. And once you finish an item, it feels very satisfying and much more as if you have earned it, and less like you just got lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong, getting lucky is fun. The OMG moments of slamming and hitting an exalted orb can be very exhilarating. However, I feel Path of Exile's looting and gearing process does have enough getting lucky moments as it is. But the I executed my plan and got rewarded for it moments are very rare. And they do reward a different type of PoE player that might otherwise not be as involved in the endgame gearing upgrading system, and maybe prefers a more deterministic and plannable grind rather than just, hey, let's see if I can get lucky with this orb. Something that Harvest crafting also enabled for the first time that I especially enjoyed was crafting on items I was already using, and improving them as I progressed through the game, without the risk of making items forever unusable, or just worse than they are currently, and with that making your character worse than it was before while trying to actually upgrade it, or maybe even making it unplayable. You can now craft with seeds on your gear that you are currently using all the time, adding and removing modifiers, even try modifiers out for a few maps and see if they are a good fit for your build. And that was never before possible in PoE to this extent, and I love it. It felt like a way more natural way of incrementally improving your character and build. Normally you can only craft on a separate item base and then swap them out with your current gear once you got a lucky upgrade. But with bases sometimes being very expensive or crafting outcomes simply being way too unlikely to ever happen, I often rather bought an upgrade instead. As for the gear progression part, I found with Harvest I am actually motivated to aim higher and play my character for longer than ever before. Usually I never really planned my build around crafting too many items either. The potential of simply not getting lucky and wasting a ton of exalted orbs in the process was too daunting. Instead, I'd rather just bought the items to get a guaranteed upgrade after a certain amount of time spent. That is the amount that it takes me to farm up the exalted orbs to buy the expensive upgrade. Because with the pure RNG crafting, I could spend 5 or 10 exalted orbs and just simply not get what I needed, which in my opinion is not only very daunting but also very demotivating. Now with Harvest, I know I can actually make the item step by step, and therefore it feels good to have several crafting projects at a time. And even if the grind takes a bit longer, I don't have to make steps back, and there are no chances of actually losing the item that I already invested in so much. Unless I of course choose to take the risk, but then it is my choice and not just the only way to get an upgrade, other than of course buying it. So instead of simply deciding an item is out of scope or unreachable, cutting my gear progression short, I now go for higher upgrades, which actually makes me want to go deeper into gearing rather than quit the league early. So while power creep usually has a tendency of making people quit earlier as it allows people to reach their desired power level way earlier, Harvest does have a different effect on me personally. And the reason I believe is that more gear upgrades have become reachable for me, and the process of obtaining them is way more fun, because I personally think buying an item is the least exciting way of obtaining an item. But currently, it is also the most common one. I personally don't think trading should be the main and default way, and also not by far the best way to upgrade gear. One reason for that is simply the fact that trading in PoE isn't the greatest experience. And secondly, I often had the following problem. As the economy of a league slows down a lot, and less players play the league, it can be very hard to find upgrades to the gear you were able to buy when the league was more active. That often in the past left me with either having to wait very long to buy anything useful or gamble all my currency away on crafts. Plus, being able to make specific gear allows for niche builds to be more powerful, as the market will never actually cater to those niche builds, as crafting items for the meta builds is way more profitable, so it doesn't really make sense to craft items for builds only 5 or 10 people play. But with the deterministic crafting methods, those players with their off-meta builds are actually able to craft their own items way more efficiently and make their off-meta builds just as strong and maxed out as the meta builds might become. And for my last point, I do think that the deterministic and accessible harvest crafting does smooth out the endgame progression curve very nicely. Around week 3 or so of the league, where I got my characters set up pretty well. I got all the build enabling unique items equipped and all my rares are at least decent or pretty good, and if I now wanted to noticeably upgrade any gear of my character, on each piece I'd have to spend an exponentially higher amount of currency to make these upgrades than I have so far invested into the whole character. As the step from good to great gear in PoE is very expensive in comparison. A good item might cost you 100 Chaos Orbs, for example. A great item in the same slot might be worth maybe 8 Exalted Orbs. Of course, I could go for a smaller upgrade, maybe worth 2 Exalted Orbs at first. But the gameplay improvement in power, I would barely notice. So instead of taking ages to farm up these insane upgrades that are just way more expensive than anything you've so far put into the character, that is when most people re-roll to a different build or simply quit the league and come back next patch. Harvest, allowing you to improve on your existing items, smoothens out the progression so much that alone makes me want to play a build longer. Because I can continually and incrementally upgrade my character instead of having to farm, let's say 200 maps to get my next upgrade. To sum it up, I think harvest crafting is vastly better than the currency orb gambling we had before. Plannable, deterministic crafting is more rewarding. Upgrading existing gear in meaningful ways while using it improves on endgame progression so much and in so much needed ways, and has the potential of keeping players engaged in the gearing process for way longer, and thus helping player retention. So if it was for me, remove the seas, remove the garden, but keep deterministic crafting in the game, please. I would love that, and I think it would make PoE a much better game. Subscribe if you are new to the channel. I'm Yoji, and I will see you soon.